it's Lee from coloringqueen.net, and I hope that you are all doing well today. It's been a very weird weather here in Queensland. Last week it was really hot and humid, and this week it has been pouring rain. And even though it's summer now, I've had to pull the winter woolies out to get warm. So I swear, in recent years, the weather has become stranger and stranger here. Anyway, today I'm colouring from Maria Trolle's colouring book for my Floravember colour along. And I love these flowers, so I'm going to colour some and do some offline like I usually do. But I'll show you what and how I have coloured each component as we go along. And I'm a bit late posting this video, and for those that follow my dog Buddy on Instagram, they'll know the reason why. We've had a really rough week with him and with multiple seizures, which resulted in an emergency hospital treatment and him staying overnight. Fortunately, David was off work, so he was able to carry him and help me with him. And Billy, the little dog that I mind during the day, his mummy is one of the vet nurses at the hospital where Buddy goes to. So she arranged for all of the nurses to give Buddy extra cuddles and pets, and sent me lots of pictures and videos of him during his stay because we were worried sick about him. And even though when he was discharged, he still wasn't able to walk and had to be stretchered out, and it was really heartbreaking. But fortunately, we've got the doggy elevator, and it was actually days before he could get up and stand by himself. So I'm really glad that David was home to help me lift him up, and we had to lift him by the harness. He couldn't even stand up by himself, and he just collapsed. But anyway, fortunately, he's home now, and he has recovered now, and it's just been a miserable week, and that's why I'm really behind on everything. We've also ended up with a new vet out of it, so she's looking after him now, and she seems really on the ball and told us a lot of things about his medication that we didn't know and how it affects his personality, because he has seemed a bit down and sad and losing muscles and control over the back legs. And apparently these are all side effects of one of his medications. So we're looking at changing that because of the side effects and how they're treating him. And so the other thing is that she wanted a copy of his seizure diary, and because mine's handwritten, I couldn't really copy it, so I thought I'd put it all into a spreadsheet. And of course this became a project on its own, and I ended up adding to it and putting in the weather for each day, and I had to of course look that up on an hourly basis. And then I looked up all the lunar patterns, because some people think that epilepsy is linked to lunar cycles, and and then of course I wanted to try and see if I could see a pattern or a trigger, and then of course I had to put it into charts and to do some bar charts, see if there's any patterns so that you can see at a glance. And of course with David being home, that's also a huge distraction, because he comes in every 5 seconds and tells me something ridiculous. But anyway, that's love for you. And after all that work, doing the seizure diary, and at least I've got it online now in the cloud, the really disheartening thing was I couldn't see any pattern. So maybe the vet will see something that I'm not seeing. But it's really quite frustrating. I wish I could point to something and say, hey, this is what causes it. But anyway, today we're waiting for the blood test to come in and see if we should change or adjust his medication. So that's where we're at. But before all of that happened, we'd had a really great weekend, and we'd taken Buddy to the Gold Coast, which is south from where we live. It took about an hour and a half because there was a lot of traffic that day, and everyone was wanting to hit the beaches last weekend because it was such a lovely warm day. And we eventually got to the beach that we wanted to go to, but we actually couldn't find room in the car park. It was that crowded. So we actually had to go a bit further to another beach where we got a park. Anyway, that turned out to be really good, and Buddy had a great time in the surf, and he was diving in and getting wet and meeting lots of other dogs. So it all worked out really well. And this weekend, if the weather finds up, we will probably beat the crowds and stay at home and go in our pool, which we've finally got all the chlorine and whatnot worked out on it. It's a saltwater pool, but the salt makes its own chlorine. And we had actually had Buddy in the pool the other day after we'd gone to the beach, and he went for a bit of a swim there, but he really prefers the beach. I prefer the pool because I don't trust that ocean. And I can't swim. I can just do underwater, So I like to know where the edges are. So, but Buddy, as soon as he sees the beach, he tries to drag us to it, and once he has a swim and he gets out, he often just turns straight around and goes straight back in. So he's a real water baby, not like his mum, but and David is as well. So he's got David to play with. So of course, every time we take him to the beach, the car ends up just full of sand, and so does the house. So I have to hit the vacuuming so hard, and even days later there's still sand everywhere. So I guess that's the problem of going to the beach. But the good thing is that Buddy's happy, David's happy when we go to the beach, so that's the main thing. And Buddy also looks super cute with his black hair with little tips of white salt on it from the sand, from the ocean. He gets these little like white salt tips until we wash it off. So he looks adorable with it. It looks like he's had his hair tipped. And so, yeah, on the weekend I ended up making these mushroom quiches, and I brought them along and we had a little brunch and sat on the beach, and it was a really good day. I've actually been doing a lot of cooking lately, and the reason for that is so I can try and get my diabetes under control, going through recipes in the diabetes books and buying the things that they say. But I've got to tell you, I wouldn't knock back a bag of potato chips at this stage, but at least with cooking it, I know what's going on in my meals, so better for me. And as well as Buddy, I've also been hitting the doctors hard. I had to go and see all the medical professionals that I was recommended to for my diabetes, and so it's been really good to touch base with all of these people. I've seen a podiatrist, a dietitian, exercise and diet guy. So it's nice to have that all done and tick it off my list. And here in Queensland, you get these things every year for free. So it's really nice to get the advice and see what I've been doing right and whatnot. So happy with that. And at least it's off my list, because my list is always never ending. Anyway, I'm going to use my Spectrum Noir pencils on this colouring book, because it's about time they jumped out of their tin and got a bit of a workout. And because each tin in the Spectrum Noir series of pencils is actually in a set of tones, it's actually easier for me to work out colour blends. Now, before I go on with today's story, I just want to give an update on a recent story I covered in one of my coffee, crime and colouring, and it was the disappearance of 5-year-old Michael, or Monkey as he's known, Vaughan. And as I said in that video, the disappearance was being investigated as an abduction. Sadly, that is no longer the case, and the case has taken a tragic turn. I've put an update in the pinned comments of that video, and I'll link to that below. A press release, as at the day I'm filming this, is going to be issued by the Fruitland Police Department later on today, but as at the time I'm filming, I don't know what the contents are, other than a woman has been arrested who lives in the same street as where Monkey disappeared, and unfortunately she is not fit for trial or fit for a hearing at this stage, and I believe there's going to be a future day in December for that. But until that press release is released later on today, I can't tell you more, other than that the Fruitland Police Department were conducting extensive searches throughout that particular property. Anyway, I think you guys can all put two and two together on that one. So on to today's story, and I do have some more detail in the pinned comment of that video. But anyway, on to today's story. Today we are going to the town of Beckley in West Virginia in the USA. And in that town lived Julie Wheeler, her husband Rodney, and her two sons. Now, on Sunday, 31st of May 2020, Julie and Rodney and one of their sons decided to spend the day hiking. So they drove over to the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve, which is about 70,000 acres, and it looks absolutely stunning with beautiful canyons, the North River flowing through it, and it's got, of course, beautiful views. It looks like a lovely place to hang out, and it's actually renowned for its whitewater rafting and, of course, their beautiful climbing trails and rocks for abseiling. And it seems that the hike was going really well until Julie lost her earring. And when she lost this piece of jewellery, it was by the side of an area called the Grandview Overlook. Now, this is a dangerous part of the park, as it sits 1,400 feet above the New River Gorge, and it has like a really steep cliff with multiple ledges, and then it drops right down towards the river. Now, Julie was searching for her earring, and the next thing her husband and son recalled was that she slipped and disappeared from view. Now, looking over the cliff face, there was no sign of Julie on any of the ledges visible, and it was clear that Rodney and their 17-year-old son would need some help in order to locate Julie, and hopefully alive. Now, Rodney dialed 911 about 8:30 p.m, and he was frantic. He was explaining to the operator that his wife had just fallen over the cliff in the national park, and authorities were really quick. They arrived on the scene, and Rodney did all he could to assist them. He explained how the family had been hiking, how Julie noticed that she'd lost an earring, how she went to search for it, and ultimately how they seen her slip on the overlook. And he showed them the site where she had fallen, and her son confirmed as well that she had fallen over the side of this cliff. A witness that was in the area at the time also told authorities that they'd seen a woman looking over the overlook, but when they turned to look again, she wasn't there. Now, quickly, authorities immediately organised a search for the 44-year-old mother and care worker, and the search involved hundreds of volunteers, police, professional rescue services. Days were spent trekking along the base of the New River, where Rodney had indicated that she had fallen. And the search also was assisted by helicopters. This was supplied by the Air National Guard. The Beaver Volunteer Dive Team were involved in looking through the water. The Vertical Rescue Team, which goes up and down the side of the cliff faces, and of course the Sheriff's Department. Other experts with cliff climbing went down the side of the cliff, and of course there were tracker dogs, their handlers, all sorts of people. So we've got ground, sea, water, air, all covered. This was a huge search. Now, Rodney also kept family and friends in the loop. He told everyone the details of his wife's accident on his Facebook the next night, and he asked everyone, friends, relatives, for prayers for her safe return. His Facebook post actually said, the accident at Grandview yesterday involved my wife. They have not found her yet, but I'm holding out hope that she will be found and she is okay. I'm heartbroken and lost right now, but I have to have faith. Please give us time to work through this, and please keep us in your thoughts and prayers. And the search continued for days. Signs of Julie were found, a shoe, a cell phone at the base of the cliff, but no signs of Julie, and no missing earring, nothing. Julie Wheeler was 44 when she was reported missing, and at that time she operated a company called JRW Home Care Support Services. And through that company she worked as a caregiver for a family member, and it's believed that that was her sister who was given the name of KL, and that family member actually suffered from spina bifida, which is a type of birth defect where there's an incomplete closing of the spine, which happens in utero, and later on this leads to complications which can include limited mobility and poor bladder or bowel control, among other things. Now, KL required a lot of care, and Julie was the provider of that care through her company. She had to bathe KL, groom her, feed her, look after her personal hygiene and lifestyle, and just basically provide support for her. Now, the US healthcare system is unbelievably expensive to those looking in from across the pond like me, and taking care of KL full time, 7 days a week, would have incurred a massive amount of money. But fortunately, KL was eligible for financial support and benefits through Veteran Affairs, and in particular their Spina Bifida Healthcare Benefits Program. The VA actually provides healthcare benefits to certain Korean and Vietnam War veteran children, and Julie's company was approved to supply this particular care, and the rate of payment was actually really high, $746 for an 8-hour day for providing these services. Now, not only was this work important to patients in the wider community, it was also very well paid, but an essential service for those that need this full-time care, basically. So she was very lucky that KL was very lucky that she was eligible for this VA healthcare benefits, because otherwise I think the cost in the US health system would have been really prohibitive. Julie's family were interviewed a number of times, trying to find her and locate her and get any bit of information that the investigators could. And as well as investigators, probation officers were also visiting the home. And it wasn't long before Rodney mentioned that Julie was due to be sentenced. Now, initially, her sentencing was meant to be on the 20th of May, but this had actually been postponed to the 30th of June. And this gave the case a whole new twist. Was this a missing persons case? Had this mother had an accident? Or was it something completely different? It seems that the money provided by Veterans Affairs to provide care for the patient with spina bifida wasn't enough for Julie. Although she'd been caring for the patient, she'd also been cooking the books. She'd been lodging claim forms from October 2016 to April 2018, stating that she'd been caring for KL 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, charging the VA over $700 for a day's work each time, but hadn't in fact been providing the services for this amount of time. The healthcare fraud she'd been committing had been discovered when investigators were investigating pill mills in the area, and she admitted to the VA and the FBI that she'd inflated the rate and quality of the care that she had provided to KL. And actually, a few months before her disappearance in February of 2020, she'd pled guilty to healthcare fraud in the federal court. And she was actually due to be sentenced, as I said, on the 20th of May, just 11 days before her disappearance. But it had been postponed to the end of June. Her sentencing could have included up to 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. In addition, the government was also seeking restitution for all those payments which had been fraudulently claimed, and that was estimated to be between $300,000 and $460,000. Her crime at the time was described by US Attorney Mike Stewart as absolutely despicable, motivated by greed. He said the fraud denied much-needed spina bifida care for her own sister, while also fleecing the Veterans Administration of almost $300,000. With this knowledge, investigators looking into the disappearance of Julie wondered if there was a little bit more to it. At first, rescuers had reason to believe Rodney's story. They'd found a shoe and a cell phone, supposedly belonging to Julie, at the base of the cliff. And every time authorities had interviewed Rodney at his home, he'd stuck to the story that he had seen her fall over the cliff while trying to locate her earring. But by the 2nd of June 2020, the police decided to get a search warrant to search the home. They'd run out of options with their ground search of the area in the national park looking for Julie, and they wanted to see more of what was going on in the family home. In particular, their search warrant looked for electronics, like phones, and when they searched the property, what they found downstairs in the closet wasn't actually a phone. It wasn't anything on their search warrant. It was Julie, very much alive and well. Now, it turns out that Julie never in fact went for a hike that day. Instead, she'd hatched a plan with her husband Rodney and son to fake her death and ultimately avoid going to prison. She'd actually stayed in the closet just meters often from where investigators had been. The plan was later, when things cooled down, her family would just move elsewhere and she would escape justice for her healthcare fraud. Not only did they think nothing of avoiding punishment for the crimes already committed against a disabled person, but they also had no qualms about putting the lives of people at risk, trying to rescue her, and then added their minor son to the plan as well. Both Julie and Rodney were taken into custody immediately. They were ultimately given a $100,000 bond and placed on home confinement. The case was actually put back because these two actually asked for a state lawyer to represent them, what we call in Australia legal aid. Now, it turns out they were not entitled to that because they earned too much money. But eventually, their case went to court. They were charged with fraudulent schemes, conspiracy, false information, a false emergency report, disruption of a governmental process, obstructing officers, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. And now these charges were related basically to the false reporting of an emergency. And of course, Julie still had to face sentencing for the healthcare fraud. And luckily, she was caught well in time for that. And the sentencing went ahead on the 30th of June. She was sentenced to 42 months in prison, and 3 years supervised release for her healthcare fraud, and ordered to pay $289,000 odd in restoration to the Veterans Administration. The court recommended that she serve out her time at the federal prison at Alderson. Months later, in October, she also pleaded guilty to the federal felony offence of conspiracy to obstruct justice, and she admitted that she had conspired with her husband to fake her death, and her husband and her son to call 911, claiming that she had fallen. The US Attorney Mike Stewart said that she risked the lives of first responders, wasted critical resources of law enforcement and taxpayers in an attempt to evade her sentence in a federal fraud case, only to be found safely hiding in a closet at her home. The only thing she gained was a subsequent federal conviction. So on the 3rd of February 2021, Julie received a sentence of 12 months and 1 day for her role in the federal conspiracy to obstruct justice, and she was ordered to serve her previous sentence for the healthcare fraud consecutively, so one after the other. So now she has ended up with 54 months in federal prison. So she just added to her sentence by doing this whole fake death thing. And of course, Rodney didn't come out of it unscathed either. He pled guilty the month previously, in January, to the federal offence of conspiracy to obstruct justice. And that was basically because on that massive search effort, Rodney kept giving false statements to both state and federal investigators. It was designed to mislead them about his wife's whereabouts, including that post that he put on Facebook asking for thoughts and prayers. The whole idea and the purpose of those statements was to continue this belief that Julie had actually fallen and was missing, when in fact she'd never even been to the park that day. So he was ordered to serve 2 months in federal prison, followed by 6 months of home confinement, and then 3 years of supervised release. And it's unclear if the couple's 17-year-old son was ever charged with anything. I doubt it personally. And KL, the patient that had spina bifida, she actually passed away in 2018. And at this time, coincidentally or not, Julie's sister, Kelly, who was disabled and 37, died in October of that year. And although KL wasn't identified in most of the sources I looked at, this and the comment from the US State Attorney that their patient was her sister, it seems probable that Kelly and KL were the same person, and that she, her own sister, was the woman who was the victim of Julie's greed, as well as Veterans Affairs and law enforcement and search and rescue operations. And it was estimated that Julie's whole fraud, that she'd actually collected $417,000 from a Veterans Administration for work that she hadn't actually done when caring for what it's assumed, based on the things that I've said earlier, was actually her own sister. I'd love to know what you think of the case. I think the sentencing was a bit light on, but as you may have guessed, I'm hard. I'm really hard, and if it was me, I would have been slapping a bit more on there, just on the basis of the crime. To me, it's a terrible crime, because she's taking from a service that was designed to help people that are disabled, that have spina bifida, that rely on caregivers to help them with their day-to-day needs. They're the most vulnerable section of society, and to me this is a horrendous crime. And then not only not to take your sentencing when it's due to be given out, but cause more authorities to put their lives at risk to search for something and waste their time looking for someone that wasn't even there. I don't know. I'd love to know what you guys think of this case, and if you think the sentencing was a bit light, or if you are more compassionate than me and think that the sentencing was fine or not much. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. So that's it from me. Until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.